What's going on, guys? It is I, Jason, here to bring you our third Duel Masters Top 10 list. This month I'm covering Darkness, which is one of my favorite civs because of how many diverse effects it brings to the table, like Destruction, Creature Recovery, and most importantly, Discard. Just as a quick reminder, the criteria Andrew and I used when choosing the cards are how much does this card make me want to include the civ in my deck, how likely am I to include this card in my deck if running the civ, and of course, how good is this card? I feel like it's slowly creeping into meme territory at this point, but there will be no Master of Death. Like my previous list, I'll be rounding up the honorable mentions first. So, Gigabrand is a card I had never even heard of until Andrew brought it to my attention when we were making the list. It came out in the lattermost sets, so that probably explains why. Basically, he penalizes the opponent for drawing cards outside the start of their turn. The ability to punish your opponent for trying to create pace is really neat, but what holds him back is the fact that he is a reactive card, and I don't feel super comfortable paying 6 mana for a card that will probably end up doing nothing. Propeller Mutant is a favorite of mine, who also sadly failed to make the list. I feel like he isn't bad in any deck, but always just seems to end up on the chopping block when we have to cut down our lists. As anyone who's played against him knows, he can end up doing a lot of damage thanks to his cheapness and great effect, and really makes your opponent think twice about getting rid of him. Upheaval, funnily enough, another Shockwaves card I have no experience with, is also going on the honorable mentions list. I feel like it's one of those wacky cards you can do crazy things with, like generate pluses when you're up in mana, or lock your opponent out of the game by making them discard their hand and upheaving the following turn, but I'm leaving it off the list due to my lack of experience with it. It seems like a bit of a gimmick to me, and I feel like more decks would have played it when the TCG was alive if it were a shoe-in for most of the aforementioned categories. Last on the HMs is Death Smoke, a card that has fallen out of favor for me in control decks, but has become a mainstay in stall. The reason I'm leaving this card off the list is because I find deriving decent value from it too situational. I agree that it's an awesome answer to expensive boss cards, but more often than not, I just find it to be a slightly more expensive blocker or weenie killer that doesn't even have shield trigger. So, speaking of destruction, the first card in the top 10 list is a slightly improved version of Death Smoke, Hopeless Vortex. I knew one of these cards was going to make it in, and ultimately we decided on Hopeless Vortex. The trade off with Death Smoke is basically the extra mana cost for the ability to target tapped creatures, most notably evolutions and speed attackers. Like Propeller Mutant, this is the card that most often ends up on the chopping block first, but for lack of competition, it's good enough to scrape the list. Coming in at number 9 is our first and sadly only graveyard retrieval card, Dark Reversal. Creature recovery is unique to the Darkness Civ, so it certainly has that going for it. However, I find that creature recovery cards are also first on the chopping block when cuts need to be made, unless you're running a certain kind of deck. We ultimately favored it over Corpse Charger and Morbid Medicine because of its versatility and splashability, yes, that's a word now, that result in ease of use, which lets it creep its way into more decks. Doing better than my last list, we've got a cool guy coming in at number 8, Gigabrand Vile Centurion. I think shield destruction effects are somewhat rare, but almost always great, and this dude is awesome. Sure, given how much he costs, he's a little on the weaker side, but we aren't overly concerned with using him to attack, since he fulfills his purpose the moment he is summoned. Despite not being the most splashable card and alternatives sort of existing, I still think he makes a solid case for why we should build a deck around him. Moving on, we've got Ghost Touch for number 7. I feel like the general trend is the lower cost cards don't make you want to run the Civ, but if you do, they are quite likely to be included, and Ghost Touch is no exception, gaining favor with me in recent years. A very underrated card in my view, its ability to generate advantage at every stage of the game is something that shouldn't be overlooked. Don't let its simplicity fool you, as Ghost Touch is a card truly worthy of its spot on the list. I'll have to admit this next card was difficult to rank. Coming in at number 6, we have Slash Charger. Back at school, I'd have a friend who would meme, Slash Charger is basically a 3-mana Terror Pit. And I can see why one would think that, but I don't think it's quite that simple, and possibly a discussion worthy of its own video. Slash Charger can be very devastating for eliminating the key cards of your opponent's deck before they have a chance to play them, and has the unique benefit of being an early game charger with a fantastic effect. I often wonder why it isn't an immediate inclusion in many decks, but by virtue of its great stats, being one of if not the best charger, and sky high potential, Slash Charger is a card we just couldn't ignore. This one may come as a bit of a surprise, but the next card on the top 10 is actually Bloody Sceeto, who is arguably the best blocker in the game. There is a reason he is the go-to blocker for all Darkness decks, despite there being a plethora of blockers to choose from in the Darkness Civ. Costing 2 mana, not only is he able to protect against weenies trying to rush you down, but he can also stand up to mini-bosses like Fal, Merfolk, Gauntlet, and Pyro, and escape the ever-present Searing Wave, a distinction he holds over just about every 2 mana blocker. A near guaranteed inclusion for essentially all Darkness decks, we aren't going to fight the numbers, our boy Bloody Sceeto is a top 5 card. Drop it. The number 4 spot belongs to one of my personal favorites, Lost Soul. There are fewer greater pleasures in the DMTCG than making your opponent drop a fat hand using a single card. Personal bias aside though, Lost Soul is a powerful card that finds its way into most Darkness decks which make their way into the late game. So most Darkness decks. I also feel like it is the main reason many decks run Darkness in the first place. The only reason I can't put it any higher is because it is typically run in low numbers, especially in comparison to some of the other entries in the list, but always remember, first Lost Soul wins. All aboard the crazy train. We've got Locomotiver pulling in for the number 3 spot. Loco is a card that appears in most Darkness decks by virtue of being one of the best shield triggers in the game. If broken into early, he can often spell doom for your opponent. Hard summoning him often isn't bad either and can reap you dividends at essentially any stage in the game. We're also chucking him on in place of Gigabalza, who does the same thing, due to Hedrians being better than Chimeras thanks to the existence of Hydra's Mutant Emperor. The decision to cut down on Loco is often a difficult one, but you know what Darkness Shield trigger doesn't cause as much deliberation? Terror Pit. The runner-up spot goes to one of my most frequently mentioned cards. As far as removal goes, Terror Pit is arguably the best removal card in the game, and unless you're running Darkness Rush or something to that effect, there's no reason not to play it if you're including Darkness. There isn't a whole lot to say about one of the most consistently useful cards in the game, aside from me having to explain myself for why I didn't give it the crown. Number 1. Cranium freaking Clamp. In my view, one of the most devastating, broken, and anti-fun cards in the TCG, I am giving Cranium Clamp the crown over Terrapit. Fun fact, Cranium Clamp is actually a watered-down version of a Japanese card, and it's still really good. I mean, sure, your opponent gets to choose, and it's just a double Ghost Touch, but trading 2 for 1 in hand advantage is actually a much bigger deal than some might realize. It often functions like a mid-game Lost Soul too, funnily enough, costing pretty much half. As far as our categories go, it ticks all the same boxes as Terrapit, but the fact that it has no soft substitutes for its function gives it a clear edge, making it, in my opinion, the best card in the Darkness Civ. I think the fact that majority of the list is made up of spells just goes to show how powerful darkness spells really are. Like Water, Andrew and I had 7 out of 10 mutual entries, so not a hard list to put together and would have been 8, but I'm an idiot and forgot about Slash Charger. As usual, I would like to express my gratitude for your taking the time to watch this video, and feel free to leave your own Darkness Top 10 lists in the comments below. Next month, Andrew will be bringing you our top 10 fire cards, a list which I suspect will be more challenging to put together than these last two. As for me, though, I'll see you in the next one.